Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today we have an episode of Quest for Quarters. On episodes like these, I take you through underrated budget cards that you should be considering when you're building your decks. For these episodes, not only does every card have to be under $1, but they also need to be used in less than 4% of eligible decks on EDH Rec. This show and episodes like this one are possible because of viewers like you. So if you're looking for some easy ways to help support the show, make sure you like this episode and share it with friends. And make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Thank you to everyone who's already purchased our merchandise, it really does help support the channel. Another easy way to support this channel is by using our TCG Player affiliate links. So make sure that you're looking for those links in the description whenever you're buying a deck or just individual cards. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Today's first underrated Quest for Quarters card is Exhaustion. Currently it's just 72 cents and sees play in less than 200 decks. It's a sorcery for 2 and a blue, and it says, creatures and lands target opponent controls don't untap during their next untap step. Now to some, this might seem like a pretty small effect, but this can be absolutely devastating in a lot of situations. Not allowing one player to untap their creatures or lands denies them of a ton of resources and puts them in a very vulnerable position. In Magic, there are a few things that you count on, and one of those things is being able to untap your permanents. When you're able to prevent a player from doing that, you're gonna throw them off. If someone is completely tapped out, you're essentially skipping their turn for just 3 mana. That's another turn they can't cast anything or untap their creatures to defend themselves. Now keep in mind, this doesn't affect artifacts, so that player will still have access to whatever mana rocks that they have. That being said, for most decks, that's nowhere near enough mana to do anything. Now, there aren't any cards out there that are exactly like this, but let's take a look at some similar ones. First up, there's a Stacks card like Stasis. It's nearly $6 and sees play in over 2,300 decks. Stasis says, players skip their untap steps, and at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice Stasis unless you pay blue. So Stasis affects all players and doesn't allow anyone to untap anything. Now, there are a lot more ways to abuse Stasis, so it can be a much more impactful and game-breaking card. But actually, because this card can be so oppressive, many people don't like to play with this card at all. Exhaustion only affects one player, and it's a one-time effect. If someone is way ahead of everyone else, you can slow them down and leave them open. Another somewhat comparable card for a different reason is Temporal Mastery. Currently it's over $10 and sees play in over 6,000 decks. It's a sorcery for 5 blue, but has a miracle cost of 1 and a blue, and it says take an extra turn after this one, exile Temporal Mastery. Now casting Exhaustion doesn't give you an extra turn, it just technically takes the turn away from someone else. In many circumstances, Temporal Mastery is a lot better. But if you're not casting it for its miracle cost, 7 mana is a lot to spend. And taking an extra turn is usually more valuable than taking someone else's away. But that's actually not always the case. If you're way ahead of everyone else, that extra turn can really help you go off and finish off all of your opponents. But if there's one really threatening player and you and the 2 other opponents are way behind that player, forcing them to take a turn off can be even more impactful. You're essentially giving yourself and those 2 other players an extra turn to take them out. Again, if they're completely tapped out, they're not going to be able to respond to anything or block. Again, this is very dependent on what is tapped, so keep that in mind. Now, the reason I brought up Temporal Mastery first is that it can cost as little as 2 mana. But even though Time Warp is 5 mana, Exhaustion is actually more similar to that. Time Warp is currently over $11 and sees play in nearly 6,000 decks. Other than mana cost, there is one crucial difference between Time Warp and Temporal Mastery. When you resolve Temporal Mastery, it exiles and Time Warp doesn't. This allows you to recur and abuse Time Warp. And much like Time Warp, Exhaustion also doesn't get exiled. Because of that, you can recur it and recast it to keep that player down. And even though I said earlier that Exhaustion isn't an extra turn spell, at the end of the game, it really is. Because when you're down to a 1v1 situation, you're essentially skipping their turn. Now again, that depends on if they have mana rocks or if they've got things to untap, but still, just bear with me, it can be a very effective card. But now that we've talked about cards that it's similar to, let's talk about where it might fit. In a stacks build like Grand Arbiter Augustin IV, it can definitely use a card like this. In a political control deck like Feldergrave is also a fantastic place for this. It can even fit into a Voltron style deck like Nezahal. Not allowing someone else to untap their creatures can be a death sentence for that kind of a deck. In my opinion, Exhaustion is an extremely underrated card and can have a huge impact on a game. It definitely should be seeing more play than just 175 decks. But now it's time for us to move on to our next underrated card of the day with Brass's Bounty. Currently it's just 32 cents and sees play in 2,400 decks. It's a sorcery for 6 and a red, and says for each land you control, create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. This is a fantastic temporary ramp spell that can really put you far ahead and lead to some very explosive turns. Let's just say that you're casting this on curve with 7 lands in play. You're going to create 7 treasures, so if you hit your next land drop, next turn you'll have access to 15 mana. There are plenty of situations where having access to 15 mana can end a lot of games. Now there are certain decks and commanders that this definitely works better with, and it's not for every single deck. But I definitely think that it's being underrated, and there are plenty of decks that are overlooking it. It's a very unique card, but there are some cards that are similar, so let's go through them now. First up, there's Spell Swindle, which is currently 85 cents and sees play in over 4,600 decks. It's an instant for 3 blue, and it says counter target spell, create X colors treasure artifact tokens where X is the spell's converted mana cost. So that does cost 2 less than Brass's Bounty, but the amount of treasure that you get is going to be very variable. To cast this spell, you have to hold open a decent amount of mana, and you have to hope that someone tries to play a big spell. And there are times when someone's going to try to play a very impactful 2 or 3 drop that you have to counter with this. In that case, you're really only going to get 2 or 3 mana back. Now, there are times when this can be bigger, but it's going to be much easier to count on something like Brass's Bounty. Another variable treasure creator is Dockside Extortionist. Now, this card is pretty new, but it's already nearly $20. When it enters the battlefield, create X treasure tokens where X is the number of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control. Now, early in the game, this might not give you anything for 2 mana, but late in the game, most of the time, this can give you a ton of treasure tokens. A lot of decks are probably going to want this more than Brass's Bounty, but there are some decks that prefer that consistency that Brass's Bounty gives. Also, Brass's Bounty is just a lot cheaper than this card. The final card to compare to is Boundless Realms. Currently, it's nearly $3 and sees play in over 5,600 decks. It says search your library for up to X basic land cards where X is the number of lands you control and put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Now, both have the exact same converted mana cost and are fairly similar. One major difference though is that Boundless Realms is going to get you lands, so it's a permanent source of ramp. But those lands do have to be basic, so there are some decks that aren't going to want to run this because they don't run a lot of basics. Also, those lands do come into play tapped, so you can't use them right away. In comparison, you can use the treasure that Brass's Bounty creates right away if you need to. And there are some decks that are definitely going to want to do that. So let's go over those now and see where's a good fit. First up, there's a newer commander with Korvold, Feycurse King. It has whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Korvold and draw a card. So let's go through that same example that we had earlier. We cast Brass's Bounty with 7 lands in play and we create 7 treasure. We can sacrifice all those treasures right away to add 7 mana to our mana pool and also to draw 7 cards. On top of that, we're going to be putting 7 +1/+1 counters on Korvold. Another commander that loves Brass's Bounty is Golos Tireless Pilgrim. With it in play, we can pay 2 in Wooburg to exile the top 3 cards of our library and play them this turn without paying their mana cost. When we hit Brass's Bounty with Golos, we're essentially getting 1 or even more activations. In a token stack like Brutaclad, Telkor Engineer is a fantastic place for it as well. Creating 7 treasure tokens that we can turn into more threatening tokens is huge. Again, in my opinion, Brass's Bounty has more application than people are seeing and should be played in a lot more decks. And now let's move on to our next Quest Recorder's card today with Mitotic Slime. Currently it's just 42 cents and sees play in 1,300 decks. It's a 4/4 ooze that costs 4 and a green. It says when Mitotic Slime dies, create 2/2/2 green ooze creature tokens with when this creature dies, create 2 1/1 green ooze creature tokens. So for 5 mana, you essentially get 1 4/4, 2 2/2s, and 4 1/1s. That's a total of 7 creatures and 12 power for 5 mana. Now you don't get all that at once, but it's still an incredible value. So this can be a great blocker, a great sacrifice target, or just something that can survive some wraths. In itself, just getting 7 creatures for 5 mana is very unheard of. Now there aren't many cards like this, but there is one in particular that comes to mind and a few that are close. So now it's time for us to take a look at those similar cards. First up, there's Reefworm, which comes in at $1.30 and currently sees play in over 2,000 decks. It's a 0/1 worm for 3 and a blue, and it says when Reefworm dies, create a 3/3 blue fish creature token with when this creature dies, create a 6/6 blue whale creature token with when this creature dies, create a 9/9 blue kraken token. So essentially for 4 mana, you're getting a total of 18 power across 4 bodies. So whereas Mitotic Slime gives you more tokens, Reefworm gives you more power. Reefworm is better at creating threats and Mitotic Slime is better at being fodder, but both definitely have their places in the right decks. Reefworm is definitely the closest, but another similar one is Chasm Skulker. Currently it's $3.12 and sees play in over 8,500 decks. It says whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Chasm Skulker. And then whenever Chasm Skulker dies, create X 1/1 blue squid creature tokens where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Chasm Skulker. So the more cards you draw, the bigger this gets and the more squids you get when it dies. This definitely has a higher upside than Mitotic Slime, but it definitely has a lower floor. The same can be said for Hallowed Spirit Keeper. Hallowed Spirit Keeper is currently $5.08 and sees play in over 1,400 decks. When it dies, you put X 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Again, similar to Chasm Skulker, it has a much higher ceiling but a much lower floor as well. If your graveyard is filled with creatures, you're getting a lot of tokens, but if it doesn't have anything in it, then you're not getting anything. But now let's take a look at some decks where Mitotic Slime can be a good fit. In a deck like Throwmite the Insatiable, you're looking to sacrifice a lot of creatures. So Mitotic Slime can be a fantastic source of creature fodder for this. It can also do well in an aristocrat style deck like Savra. If you sack all 7 of those creatures with her in play, you're going to be gaining 14 life. In a Reanimator deck like Marin of Clay and Neltoth can be a great place for it too. You can keep returning the Mitotic Slime to keep filling the board with more and more oozes. Again, 5 mana for 7 total creatures and 12 total power is something that should not be ignored. It doesn't belong in every single green deck, but Mitotic Slime is a fantastic card and deserves more respect. And today's final underrated Quest Recorder's card today is Guard Germination. It's currently 20 cents and sees play in just 1,500 decks. It's an enchantment for 1 black green and it says whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 1/1 green sapling creature token. Just 3 mana for a token generator with an effect like this is fantastic. Now this only gives you a creature every single time a non-token creature dies, but still it's a great value. You're essentially replacing the creature in an aristocrat style deck, you're giving yourself an extra thing to sacrifice. I guarantee that if this card was black-white instead of black-green, it would be seeing a lot more play. Aristocrat decks tend to be Orzhov, but there are plenty of Golgari ones as well. But let's take a look at some similar cards to this. First up, there's Up in the Graves, which is currently 86 cents, and its popularity continues to rise. Right now it's at 2,800 decks. It says whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So the tokens that it makes are bigger, but it also costs 2 more to get out. Still, both definitely have a place in the right style of deck. Next up, there's another underrated card in my opinion with Gutter Grime. Currently it's just 21 cents and sees play in 512 decks. It says whenever a non-token creature you control dies, put a slime counter on Gutter Grime, then put a green ooze creature token onto the battlefield with this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of slime counters on Gutter Grime. So basically the first time that one of your non-token creatures dies, you get a 1/1 and then a 2/2 and so on and so forth. So it does have that upside, but again it does cost 2 more than Guard Germination to get out. A card that has the same converted mana cost is Pawn of Ulamog. Currently it's $2.10 and sees play in over 6,700 decks. It says whenever Pawn of Ulamog or another non-token creature you control dies, you may create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token. It has sacrifice this creature, add colors to your mana pool. So this is another fantastic creature token generator, but it is more vulnerable because it's a creature. But even if it does die, it still benefits you and gives you a token. Like Guard Germination, this is a fantastic card in Aristocrat style strategies. Speaking of decks though, let's talk about where it might be a good fit for Guard Germination. First up, there's Thelon of Havenwood, which is a deck that revolves around fungus and saplings. So that creature type from Guard Germination is actually relevant with this. And it's especially relevant with Slimefoot the Stowaway. Slimefoot is essentially an Aristocrat style commander that revolves around saplings. Another deck that this can be great in though is Sekawar Deathkeeper. With Guard Germination in play, you're essentially doubling up the amount of tokens that you get every single time a non-token creature you control dies. Again, there aren't a ton of enchantments out there that have this kind of effect. And at just 3 mana, the amount of value that this can provide throughout the game is huge. And if you haven't seen my last Quest for Quarters episode, make sure you check it out here. But now it's time for me to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your personal favorite underrated card is. And make sure that you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Links to our social media accounts can be found in the description. Also in the description below is a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron for the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There's even a general level tier where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. I truly couldn't do this without all of your support, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.